I never imagined my life would take such an unexpected turn when my husband, Jack, suggested that his cousin Ryan stay with us for a while. Ryan had just gone through a messy divorce and needed a quiet place to recover. Being a good wife, I accepted without hesitation. After all, what harm could having a relative stay for a few weeks do? Ryan arrived on a Saturday afternoon with a small suitcase and a charming smile. From the first moment, I noticed there was something different about him. He had that bad boy air that I had always secretly been attracted to, but never sought in a serious relationship. His dark eyes seemed to hide 1,000 stories, and his deep voice sent shivers down my spine every time he spoke. The first few days passed normally. Ryan settled into the guest room and spent most of his time reading or watching TV. Jack and I continued with our usual routine, though I couldn't help but notice how Ryan's presence seemed to fill a void I didn't know existed in our home. It was during the second week when things started to change. One afternoon, while I was preparing dinner, Ryan came into the kitchen and offered to help. We worked together in silence, chopping vegetables and preparing the sauce. At one point, our hands accidentally brushed as we reached for the same knife. I felt an electric shock run through my entire body, and when I looked up, I found his eyes fixed on mine. "Sorry," he murmured, but didn't look away. "It's okay," I replied, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. From that moment on, I became more aware of Ryan's presence in the house. I noticed how his eyes followed me when I walked down the hallway, how his voice softened when he spoke to me. I tried to convince myself that he was just being friendly, that it was natural for him to seek company after his divorce, but deep down, I knew there was something more. One night, Jack had to stay late at work. Ryan and I were left alone in the house, and we decided to watch a movie together. We sat on the couch, maintaining a prudent distance between us. However, as the movie progressed, I felt that distance shrinking. At one point, our thighs touched, and neither of us did anything to separate. When the movie ended, we sat in silence, aware of the tension floating in the air. Ryan was the first to speak. "Thank you for letting me stay here," he said quietly. "I don't know what I would have done without you guys." "You don't have to thank us," I replied, turning to look at him. "You're family." Our eyes met, and for a moment I felt the world stop. Ryan leaned towards me, and I, instead of moving away, found myself leaning towards him. Our lips were about to touch when the sound of keys in the door startled us. We quickly separated, just as Jack entered the room. "How was the movie?" he asked innocently, not noticing the tension in the air. "Interesting," I replied, avoiding looking at Ryan. "I think I'll go to bed good night." That night, lying next to Jack, I couldn't stop thinking about what had almost happened. I felt guilty, but at the same time, excited. It had been years since I had felt that spark, that excitement that Ryan had awakened in me. The following days were torture. Ryan and I moved around the house like two magnets, constantly attracting and repelling each other. Every accidental brush, every furtive glance, fueled the fire growing between us. I tried to keep my distance, to convince myself that what I felt was just a passing attraction, but it became increasingly difficult. One afternoon, while Jack was at work, Ryan found me in the garden, watering the plants. He approached from behind and, without saying a word, put his hands on my shoulders. I should have moved away. I should have told him to stop, but instead, I leaned back against him, feeling the heat of his body against my back. "This is wrong," I whispered, but my words lacked conviction. "I know," Ryan replied, his warm breath on my ear. "But I can't help it. I can't stop thinking about you." I turned to face him, ready to put an end to this madness, but as soon as I saw his eyes, all my resolution vanished. We kissed with a passion that left me breathless. It was a desperate kiss, full of repressed desire and silent promises. When we separated, we both knew we had crossed a line from which there was no going back. At that moment, I should have felt guilt, remorse, but all I felt was a dizzying excitement, a sense of freedom that I hadn't experienced in years. From that day on, Ryan and I began to see each other in secret. We took advantage of every moment when Jack was away or asleep to be together. We met in dark corners of the house, exchanged desire-laden glances during family dinners, accidentally brushed against each other when passing in the hallway. Each encounter was more intense than the last. The adrenaline of the forbidden, the danger of being discovered, all mixed to create an overwhelming passion that consumed us both. Ryan made me feel alive, desired, in a way that I had forgotten existed. One night, while Jack was sleeping, I snuck into Ryan's room. He was waiting for me, and as soon as I closed the door, he caught me in his arms. We made love in silence, stifling our moans so as not to wake Jack. It was intense, passionate, and when we finished, I felt completely exhausted but strangely satisfied. However, as the weeks passed, guilt began to eat away at me. Every time I looked at Jack, every time he smiled at me or kissed me, I felt like I was drowning. He didn't deserve this, didn't deserve for me to betray him in this way. Ryan, for his part, seemed increasingly possessive. Our furtive encounters were no longer enough. He wanted more. He began to pressure me to leave Jack, to run away together, but I wasn't ready to take that step. Despite everything, I still loved my husband, and the idea of destroying our marriage terrified me. The situation reached its critical point during a family party. Jack's entire family was there, including his parents and siblings. Ryan and I had been exchanging glances throughout the night. The tension between us was palpable. At one point in the night, while everyone was distracted with games and music, Ryan grabbed my arm and took me to a secluded corner of the garden. Without saying a word, he kissed me with a passion that left me breathless. "I can't go on like this," he said when we separated. "I want you for myself, only for myself." "Ryan, please," I begged. "Not here, they'll see us." But he wasn't listening to me. His hands roamed my body desperately, and despite my fear of being discovered, I found myself responding with the same intensity we gave ourselves to each other right there in the garden, with the sound of the party in the background and the danger of being discovered at any moment. When it was over, the reality of what we had done hit me hard. I straightened my clothes with trembling hands and returned to the party, praying that no one had noticed our absence. My story isn't over yet. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks. Back to the story. The following days were hell. Guilt consumed me, and every time I looked at Jack, I felt my heart break a little more. Ryan, for his part, became increasingly insistent. He wanted me to make a decision, to choose between him and Jack one night, as the three of us were having dinner together. I noticed that Jack was unusually quiet. When Ryan got up to go to the bathroom, Jack looked at me intently. "Is there something you want to tell me?" he asked quietly. I felt my heart stop. "What do you mean?" I replied, trying to stay calm. "I've noticed how you look at Ryan," Jack said, "and how he looks at you. Is something going on between you two?" At that moment, I had the opportunity to confess everything, to release the weight I had been carrying on my shoulders. But fear paralyzed me. I couldn't bear the thought of losing Jack, of seeing the disappointment and pain in his eyes. "Don't be ridiculous," I replied with a forced laugh. "Ryan is your cousin, we're friends, nothing more." Jack looked at me for a long moment, as if searching for the truth in my eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, "I trust you." His words were like a knife in my heart. Guilt was choking me, and at that moment, I knew I had to put an end to this madness. That night, after Jack went to bed, I met Ryan in the kitchen. He tried to kiss me, but I stopped him. "This has to end," I said firmly. "I can't keep doing this to Jack, he doesn't deserve it." Ryan looked at me in disbelief. "What are you saying? Are you going to pretend that what's between us means nothing?" "It means a lot," I admitted. "But Jack is my husband, I love him, and I can't keep betraying him like this." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "What about me? What about what I feel? For you?" "I'm sorry, Ryan," I said, feeling tears begin to form in my eyes. But this has to end. Please? I think it would be better if you left. Ryan looked at me in silence for a long moment, and I could see the pain and anger in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. Okay. He said quietly, I'll leave tomorrow. That night, lying next to Jack, I cried silently. I cried for the betrayal I had committed, for the pain I had caused, for the passion I had experienced and now had to let go. The next morning, Ryan left without saying a word. Jack seemed relieved to see him go and asked me if something had happened. I told him that Ryan simply felt it was time to move on. The following weeks were difficult. I missed Ryan more than I wanted to admit, and guilt continued to weigh on me. But little by little, things started to get better. Jack and I began to talk more, to reconnect. I rediscovered why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. His kindness, his patience, his unconditional love. One day, while cleaning out the closet, I found a hidden note in one of my coats. It was from Ryan. I opened it with trembling hands and read, My dear, I understand why you did what you did. It hurts, but I understand what we had was real, intense, but also forbidden. I know you made the right decision, even though it breaks my heart to admit it. I will always carry you in my heart. I hope you find the happiness you deserve. Always yours, Ryan. I read the note over and over, feeling tears run down my cheeks. Finally, I carefully folded it and put it in the bottom of a drawer. It was a reminder of what I had experienced, of what I had risked, and of what I had decided to protect. That night, when Jack came home, I greeted him with a long, tight hug. He seemed surprised, but returned the hug with equal intensity. I love you, I told him, looking into his eyes. More than you can imagine. He smiled, that smile that had always melted my heart. I love you too, he replied. At that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. The love I shared with Jack was strong, lasting, built on years of trust and mutual understanding. What I had had with Ryan had been intense and passionate, but also ephemeral and destructive. As the months passed, the memory of Ryan gradually faded. I no longer felt that sharp pain in my chest every time I thought of him. Instead, there remained a kind of bittersweet nostalgia, a reminder of how close I had come to losing everything Jack and I worked hard on, our marriage. We started doing things together that we had let slide, impromptu weekend trips, romantic dinners, long conversations late into the night. We rediscovered the passion we thought we had lost, and our love grew stronger than ever. A year after the incident with Ryan, Jack surprised me with a proposal. He wanted to renew our wedding vows. I was so moved that I couldn't hold back the tears. The ceremony was small and intimate, just us and our closest friends. As we exchanged our vows, I looked into Jack's eyes and saw everything I needed: love, trust, security. At that moment, I knew I had made the right decision in choosing him, in fighting for our marriage. That night, as we lay in bed, Jack looked at me with a serious expression. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly. I felt my heart racing. Did he know? Had he discovered my affair with Ryan? "What is it?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Jack took a deep breath before speaking. "When Ryan was living with us, I noticed how he looked at you and how you looked at him." I was left breathless, feeling panic take over me, but before I could say anything, Jack continued. "At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things, but then one night I saw you. I closed my eyes, feeling tears begin to form. This was the conversation I had feared for so long. I saw you kissing in the garden during the family party," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. I remained silent, unable to find the words. How could I explain what I had done? How could I justify having betrayed his trust in that way? "I'm sorry," I finally managed to say, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Jack. I never meant to." But Jack interrupted me, putting a finger to my lips. "Let me finish," he said softly. When I saw you, I felt my world crumbling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront you both, but I didn't. I looked at him, confused. Why not? Jack smiled sadly. Because I love you and because I realized it was partly my fault. I had become complacent in our marriage. I had stopped trying, stopped showing you how much I loved and valued you. And when Ryan arrived, with all his novelty and excitement, well, I can understand why you felt attracted to him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I had done, was Jack trying to understand me? But that doesn't justify what I did, I said, tears now freely running down my cheeks. I betrayed you, Jack. I hurt you. Yes, you did, he admitted, and it hurt more than you can imagine. But I also saw how you ended things with Ryan. I saw how you chose our marriage over the passion you felt for him. And that meant more to me than any mistake you might have made. I was left speechless. I had never expected this. Reaction from Jack I had expected, anger, pain, maybe even the end of our marriage. But this was forgiveness. It was love in its purest and most selfless form. I don't deserve your forgiveness, I said between sobs. I don't deserve your love. Jack pulled me towards him, hugging me tightly. Love isn't about deserving, he said softly. It's about choosing. And I choose you. With all your flaws and mistakes, I choose you today and every day for the rest of our life. That night, Jack and I made love with an intensity we hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the burning, dangerous passion I had felt with Ryan, but something deeper, more meaningful. It was a reaffirmation of our love, of our commitment to each other. The next morning, I woke up feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The guilt I had been carrying for so long had finally dissipated. In its place, I felt a deep gratitude towards Jack and a renewed determination to make our marriage work. The following months were of healing and rediscovery. Jack and I attended couples therapy, learned to communicate better, to express our needs and desires. Little by little, we rebuilt the trust that had been broken. One day, as we were walking in the park, Jack surprised me with a question. "Do you ever think about Ryan?" he asked casually. I stopped in my tracks, surprised by the question. Sometimes, I admitted honestly, but not in the way you think I think of him, as a reminder of how close I came to losing the most important thing in my life. Jack nodded, squeezing my hand. "You know, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if things had been different, if you had chosen Ryan instead of me." "It would never have worked," I said with conviction. What I felt for Ryan was intense, but it was a fantasy. It wasn't based on reality. What I have with you, this is real. It's lasting. It's the kind of love that can weather any storm. Jack smiled, his eyes shining with emotion. "I'm glad you think that way," he said, "because I have a surprise for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to me with a mysterious smile. I opened it curiously and pulled out 2 plane tickets. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the destination, Paris. "Paris?" I exclaimed, looking at Jack in amazement. He nodded, grinning widely. "I remember you always talked about wanting to visit Paris. I thought it was time to make that dream come true. Besides, what better place for a second honeymoon?" I threw myself into his arms, kissing him with all the love I felt. At that moment, I realized how fortunate I was. I had a husband who loved me unconditionally, who was willing to forgive my mistakes and work together to build a better future. The trip to Paris was magical. We strolled hand in hand through the cobblestone streets of Montmartre, kissed at the top of the Eiffel Tower, shared croissants in small cafes. Every moment seemed like it was out of a fairy tale. One night, as we dined in a restaurant overlooking the Seine, Jack raised his glass of wine. "To us," he said, "to the love we've shared, the obstacles we've overcome, and the future that awaits us." I clinked my glass with his, feeling tears of happiness form in my eyes. "To us," I repeated, as I looked into Jack's eyes, illuminated by candlelight. I felt a wave of love and gratitude so intense it almost took my breath away. This man, who had been willing to forgive the unforgivable, who had loved me despite my mistakes, was truly the love of my life. At that moment, I made a decision I would never again take our love for granted. I would never again allow monotony or routine to extinguish the spark between us. Every day, I would strive to be the wife Jack deserved, to keep alive the passion and love we shared. The rest of our trip to Paris was like a dream. We visited museums, strolled through the Luxembourg Gardens, sailed on the Seine. Each shared experience strengthened our bond, creating new memories that replaced the painful ones of the past. One afternoon, as we rested in our hotel after a long day of sightseeing, Jack looked at me with a serious expression. "There's something I've been thinking about," he said. "Something I want to propose to you." My heart raced, wondering what it could be. "What is it?" I asked. "I want us to have a child," Jack said, his eyes shining with excitement. "I think we're ready to take the next step in our life together." I gasped. A child. It was something we had vaguely discussed in the past, but we had never felt truly ready. But now, after everything we had been through, after renewing our love and commitment, suddenly it seemed perfect. "Yes," I said, feeling tears of happiness run down my cheeks. "Yes, I want to have a child with you." Jack hugged me tightly, and at that moment, I felt our future stretching out before us, bright and full of possibilities. We returned from Paris with new energy and renewed purpose. The following months were a whirlwind of emotion as we tried to conceive. Each negative pregnancy test was a small blow, but we remained optimistic, supporting each other in moments of doubt. Finally, after 6 months of trying, I saw the 2 pink lines that would change our lives forever. When I gave Jack the news, his reaction was pure joy. He lifted me in his arms, spinning me around the room, laughing and crying at the same time. Pregnancy was a wonderful and terrifying experience. Jack was by my side every step of the way, attending all medical appointments, rubbing my swollen feet, satisfying my late-night cravings. His unconditional love and support constantly reminded me how fortunate I was. One afternoon, while decorating the baby's room, Jack suddenly stopped with a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he said, "sometimes I think about how things could have been different if we hadn't overcome well, you know." I immediately knew what he was referring to: Ryan, the affair, the near end of our marriage. "I think about it sometimes too," I admitted. "But then I look around, see everything we've built together, and I realize that everything happened exactly as it should have." Jack nodded, a small smile on his lips. "You know, I never told you this, but there was a moment, right after Ryan left, when I considered leaving you." His admission surprised me, but not as much as it might have in the past. We had reached a point in our relationship where we could talk openly about these things without fear or resentment. "What made you change your mind?" I asked softly. Jack came closer to me, placing a hand on my swollen belly. "You," he said simply, "the way you fought for us for our marriage. I realized that what we had was too valuable to throw away. And now, with this baby on the way, I know I made the right decision." I hugged him tightly, feeling tears form in my eyes. "I love you," I whispered, "more than you can imagine." "I love you too," Jack replied, kissing my forehead. Our daughter Emily was born on a warm spring morning. The moment they placed her in my arms, I felt my heart expand in a way I had never experienced before. I looked at Jack, who was openly crying as he held our daughter's tiny hand, and I knew our family was complete. The years passed, and our life filled with the normal ups and downs of parenthood and marriage. There were sleepless nights, arguments about diapers and daycares, moments of frustration and exhaustion. But there was also laughter, hugs, first steps, and first words. Each shared experience strengthened our bond, making our love grow and mature. One day, when Emily was 5 years old, we were in the park when I saw a man who looked familiar. My heart skipped a beat when I realized who it was: Ryan. He was older, with some grey at his temples, but he still retained that bad boy air that had once attracted me so much. He was with a woman and a small child, clearly his family. For a moment, our eyes met. I saw recognition in his eyes, followed by a mix of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Surprise, nostalgia, maybe a little regret. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the moment passed. Ryan nodded slightly in my direction, a small smile on his lips before turning his attention back to his family. I felt Jack's hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I turned to look at him. Seeing the concern in his eyes, I smiled, feeling a wave of love and gratitude towards this man who had stood by my side through everything. "I'm more than okay," I replied honestly. "I'm exactly where I need to be." And it was true, seeing Ryan hadn't awakened any longing or regret. Instead, I felt a deep gratitude for the path my life had taken. I had a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, a life full of joy and purpose. That night, after putting Emily to bed, Jack and I sat on the back porch, enjoying the warm night air. I took his hand, intertwining our fingers. "You know," I said, "today I realized something." "What's that?" Jack asked, curious. "I realized that I wouldn't change anything about our past," I replied. "Not even the difficult moments, because all of that brought us here, to this perfect moment." Jack smiled, squeezing my hand. "I feel the same way," he said. "Every challenge, every obstacle we overcame together, all of that made our love stronger." We remained silent for a moment, enjoying each other's presence and the peace of the night. "Do you think we'll be like this forever?" I asked quietly. "Happy in love?" Jack turned to look at me, his eyes shining with love and determination. "I think we'll be like this as long as we keep choosing each other every day," he replied. "Love isn't just a feeling, it's a decision. And I choose to love you every morning when I wake up and every night before I go to sleep." His words moved me deeply. He was right, of course. Our love had survived the worst of storms because we had both decided to fight for it, nurture it, and protect it. "I choose you too," I said softly, leaning in to kiss him. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. Emily grew up, becoming a beautiful and bright teenager. Jack and I aged together, our love maturing like a fine wine. There were difficult moments, of course, the loss of Jack's parents, health problems, disagreements about how to raise Emily. But we faced each obstacle together, supporting each other, always remembering the commitment we had made to choose each other every day. One day, when Emily was 16, she found me looking at old photos in the attic. Among them was one of Ryan, taken during that fateful family party so many years ago. "Who's that?" Emily asked, curious. For a moment, I considered lying or evading the question, but Jack and I had always promised to be honest with our daughter. "That's your father's cousin," I replied. "Ryan. He lived with us for a while, many years ago." Emily studied the photo with interest. "He looks interesting," she said. Finally, "Why don't I know him? What happened to him?" I took a deep breath. "It's a long story, honey. One that involves some mistakes I made a long time ago." Emily looked at me, her eyes full of curiosity and a maturity that sometimes surprised me. "Do you want to tell me about it?" she asked softly. And so, sitting in the dusty attic, I told my daughter the story of Ryan, of the affair, of how I almost destroyed my marriage. I told her about temptation, about regret, and about how her father had found the strength to forgive me. When I finished, Emily remained silent for a long moment. I feared that her opinion of me had changed, that she would see me differently now that she knew about my past mistakes. Finally, she spoke. "Mom," she said, "thank you for telling me this. It must have been difficult." I nodded, not trusting my voice to speak. "You know," Emily continued, "this makes me admire you even more, you and Dad, because it shows that true love isn't perfect. It's complicated and sometimes painful, but if it's real, if both people are willing to fight for it, it can overcome anything." Her words left me breathless. My daughter, my little Emily, speaking with wisdom beyond her years. I hugged her tightly, feeling tears run down my cheeks. "I love you, honey," I whispered, "more than you can imagine." "I love you too, Mom," Emily replied, "and I'm proud to be your daughter." That night, I told Jack about my conversation with Emily. He listened in silence, his eyes shining with emotion. "We have an amazing daughter," he said when I finished. "Yes, we do," I agreed, "and it's thanks to you, to your strength, your love, your capacity to forgive." Jack shook his head. "It's thanks to us," he corrected, "to what we've built together." We went to bed that night, embracing as we had so many nights over the years. As I listened to Jack's steady breathing, I reflected on the path that had brought us here. I had made mistakes. Yes, I had been on the verge of losing everything for a moment of passion and weakness. But those mistakes, painful as they had been, had also led us to a deeper, stronger and truer love than I had ever imagined possible. Life isn't always easy. Love isn't always a fairy tale. But when you find someone who is willing to fight with you, to forgive, to grow and change, then you have something truly special. Jack and I had found that through laughter and tears, moments of joy and despair, we had built a life together, a life full of love, forgiveness, second chances. And as I lay there listening to Jack's soft snores and thinking about our wonderful daughter sleeping in the next room, I knew I wouldn't change anything. Every mistake, every stumble, every moment of doubt had led us here, to this perfect moment, to this love, perfect in its imperfection, to this life we had chosen, day after day, year after year. And as sleep enveloped me, I smiled, knowing that tomorrow I would wake up and choose this love once again, and the next day and the next, for the rest of our lives.